So I think we Christians today have to ask ourselves, how can we live in this world in such a way that when we are put to the test, we choose the Lord no matter what it costs us, even to the point of martyrdom? I started thinking about the Benedict option around 2005 or so when I was working as an opinion journalist and working on an editorial board at the Dallas Morning News, where we would have to have debates and discussions over political issues, cultural issues, things we were going to write about. And I was really frustrated by our inability to come to agreement on a lot of different issues, not because we were bad people, but because we believed such different things. I encountered around this time a book called After Virtue by the philosopher Alistair MacIntyre, who explained that this is what it means to be in the modern world. We've become so fragmented, we've lost our common story. He ends that book by talking about, by comparing our current time to the fall of the Roman Empire in the West. And he holds up St. Benedict of Nursia as an example of the kind of person who worked to make sure that there was still moral continuity and a continuity of tradition amid the collapse. Benedict, of course, he never was ordained, which is something surprising to me. He was a Christian layman who was sent down from Nursia, his hometown in the mountains of central Italy, to Rome around the year 500 to finish his education. He saw there the Roman Empire had fallen officially about 25 years earlier. He saw chaos and moral degradation and decadence and said, I'll lose my faith if I stay here. So he went out to the woods to live in a cave for 3 years to pray and to fast, to seek the Lord's will. He came out, he founded monasteries and wrote his famous rule. It was just how to live in a monastery. And this little thin book was one of the most influential in Western history because during the so-called Dark Ages, in the remnants of what had been the Western Empire, the church was the only government, and monks in their monasteries were often the only source of stability in a really wild and chaotic area throughout Western Europe. And these monks, over the next 300 years, they didn't set out to save civilization. That's what they ended up doing, only because they sought the Lord first and created this orderly way of life to bring harmony to a wild situation, chaotic situation. My idea of the Benedict option is, what would it look like for us today, the ordinary Christians? What would a new and very different St. Benedict look like? I think this is the genesis for the so-called option, which is a choice that I believe all faithful Christians living in this post-Christian society have to make. We have to be willing to turn our backs on shoring up this empire, so to speak, and which is to say, being affirmative of this order, this post-Christian order, and instead work on building the kind of small communities in our parishes, in schools, and otherwise, where we can pass on the faith to our children and live it out in a real way. Now, that's going to take more than simple catechism. It's going to take an entire conversion of way of life. What it doesn't mean is running off to the hills to build a fortress. That's the most common misconception of the Benedict option, that I'm telling people to go hide in the hills and run away. We're not monks. If we're called to the monastery, great, but most of us are called to live in the world. But we have to find a way to live in the world without becoming of the world. If we try too hard to conform to the world today, we're going to lose our faith. I think about the calling for Christians is like the Hebrews in their Babylonian exile. In Jeremiah 29, speaking to the prophet, the Lord told the Hebrews that he brought them into Babylonian exile for his own purposes. He told them to settle there in the city, to, start families, pray for the peace of the city. So they were to be integrated into the life of Babylon, even though they were exiles. But we also look at the first books of Daniel, in the book of Daniel, the first chapters, where we read the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three Hebrew men who were the king's servants. It's kind of hard to get more embedded in the structure of life in Babylon than serving the king. But when it came down to it, and he told them, the king ordered them to bow down before the false idol, they chose the prospect of death before sacrilege. So I think we Christians today have to ask ourselves, how can we live in this world in such a way that when we are put to the test, we choose the Lord no matter what it costs us, even to the point of martyrdom? Most of us will never, please God, have to face actual martyrdom, but we will have to face martyrdom in our daily lives. People are now and will continue to lose their jobs, their livelihoods, because they are faithful Christians in this post-Christian environment. I think we have got to use the time that the Lord has given us now to prepare for persecution. Whenever I go to Europe, the book has been translated into 9 languages. I go to Europe to give speeches in France, Italy, Germany, Spain, and so on. I don't have any trouble convincing people of the diagnosis, of the seriousness of this crisis, because they have already been living with de-Christianization for 2 or 3 generations now. The trouble is in America getting people to believe that this is actually going to happen. In my book, I write about the statistics, what social scientists and others are seeing about the way people are falling away from the church and the way the churches are falling away from anything that looks like historic Christian orthodoxy. It's happened. And the extent to which we deny that it's happening, we think it can't happen here, it's the extent to which we are weak and vulnerable in the face of what's happening. I'm always so cheered when I come back from Europe, even though the faith is deader there than it is here. Those who are still faithful, who are still going part of the church, they want Jesus more than anything else. They know that it's over in terms of Christianity undergirding the civil society there, and they don't care. And they're not angry about it. They're so joyful, these Christians aged 40 and under. I want to see the same sort of thing here, and I think we will see it in the future, but we're going to have to suffer more loss, I'm afraid, in this country before Christians actually wake up. So the greatest obstacle to the Benedict option right now is, first of all, the unwillingness of Christians to look around and recognize how serious, to read the signs of the times and recognize how serious things are, and therefore to make the sort of difficult decisions that need to be made in order to build themselves and their families up for what's to come. Secondly, we have to be able to find each other, and that's something I'm trying to work on now. I've been working with a donor on building a Benedict Option website that will be there solely to connect people from the different Christian traditions to find each other, because you can feel so alone and so hermit-like. And in fact, your neighbor might be thinking the same thing. People are so lonely today, and we need each other. So that's something I'm working on with some other folks. But I like spreading the message. The Benedict Option book I wrote for all Christians that I call small o Orthodox, meaning those who or conventionally be called conservatives within the various Christian confessions. But I don't like that term because it carries a political meaning, and I don't mean politically, I mean theologically. As someone who is a morally and theologically conservative Eastern Orthodox Christian, I find I have more in common with, say, a Southern Baptist or a magisterial Roman Catholic than I do even with fellow Orthodox Christians who are really more worldly and who want to try to conform the Orthodox faith to the world. I think we need each other. We don't have to try to convert each other. I have met some Christians who I've brought into Orthodoxy, or at least got on the way to Orthodoxy from other churches, but that's not what I see my purpose as. I feel that, Orthodoxy will always be a minority faith in the U.S., at least as far as I can see. But it helps us as Orthodox believers to have strong Catholic churches in our communities, to have strong evangelical churches. In Baton Rouge, where I live, we have one Orthodox church. We're growing, thanks be to God, but my kids are growing up in a world where there aren't any Orthodox Christians. The school they go to, a classical Christian school, is primarily full of evangelical Protestants. There's some Catholics there, and there's our family. We have found that to be a great kind of ecumenism. They don't try to convert us, and we don't take that time to try to convert them, that we do invite them to our church. But really, we know that we need each other. right now, that the differences that exist among us as Christians are dwarfed by the difference between us as faithful Christians and the post-Christian world. And so to the extent that I can be a bridge helping bring together Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, and Protestants in what Father Richard John Newhouse called an ecumenism of the trenches, then I want to serve the Lord in that way. By ecumenism of the trenches, I mean right there on the front lines, outside the abortion clinic, in the classroom, and in other places. That's where we learn that our unity in Jesus Christ and the Lord we confess is greater than anything that separates us.